So our first question. From the previous lesson on hetu, the definition with brief explanation has made me think and contemplate how these hetus inflict the mind deeply. Furthermore, if I contemplate it with hetu paccaya, to how vastly hetu affects the mind and body as kamma. Moreover, if I try to see it, how these hetus work like knitting the lives from each action done. So sorry, it's overwhelming. It's difficult for me to express it in words. So I hope teacher can understand what I mean. Seeing how hetu works, inflicting mind, for me is so terrifying and makes me think even more about how and what should we do to make it better escaping samsara. I hope teacher can help to give some pointers. Anumodana, teacher. So, if you look very closely at the Dhamma, you'll come to realize that these hetu are the primary cause for all this suffering and the endless rounds of births and deaths throughout samsara. So, if you take the paticca samuppada or the dependent origination, the first component or the first rung of it is avijja paccaya sankhara. So, what is avijja? Avijja is another term given for moha, delusion. And it is delusion that leads to sankhara. What is sankhara? Sankhara here refers to volition or chetana. And so basically all our actions start with a volition. Without a volition, you will not generate kamma. And this volition is driven by avijja, lack of knowledge. And what is this lack of knowledge? It is the lack of understanding of the Four Noble Truths. So, as long as we lack this understanding, we will continue to generate volition, continue to generate kamma. And these kamma or these sankhara are classified as punyabhi sankhara. That means the kamavachara and rupavachara kusala, the apunyabhi sankhara, the akusala, and anenjabhi sankhara, meaning the arupavachara kusala. And this is what brings about the rounds of rebirth and death in this endless samsara, whether it is the kamavachara, rupavachara, arupavachara plane, it is this lack of knowledge which drives us to generate kamma. So, how can learning Abhidhamma help us in this cycle of rebirth and death? Or how can it help us reduce suffering? On one hand, by practicing the Dhamma and training the mind through vipassana meditation, we can gradually eradicate the defilements which one day will lead to complete liberation. Complete liberation from these defilements means there will not be a rebirth thereafter. But that's not an easy task. It will take a long time and it's not something that will happen overnight. So, on the other hand, how will learning the Dhamma help us? If we know what is kusala, what is akusala, we will start to observe our minds and start to notice what happens to our minds and what happens to our body whenever we generate either a kusala chitta or an akusala chitta. And when we learn to identify these, when we learn to notice these, and also because we know the consequences of kusala and akusala, we will actively try to stop generating akusala and generate more kusala. So at least we will try to have less bad or undesirable results in the future. So through learning the Dhamma, it is so learning the Dhamma is not solely for the purpose of liberation. It also serves as a way of reducing future suffering and achieving future good results. So now, at the same time, can you see the motive behind our good kamma? So at the back of our minds, we have expectations for the future. We want a better existence. We want more wealth, more riches, better health, etc. So even though our kusala are not associated with moha, the chitta itself is not associated with avidya, but it's actually driven indirectly by avidya because we are craving for something. We are craving for something better. Then moving on to the Patthana Prakarana. Now we know that the Patthana Prakarana puts forward 24 conditions right at the beginning, and it is the basis of the entire volume. So these 24 conditions form the basis of the entire volume of the Patthana Prakarana. So, in other words, the cause and effect relationship that is described in the Patthana Prakarana is based on these 24 conditions. And what is the first condition? It is hetu paccaya. Hetu paccaya means the root condition. So once again, the teaching of the Patthana Prakarana begins with hetu paccaya. Why does it begin with hetu paccaya? Because this is the strongest and the most important condition that drives beings throughout samsara. So hetu are called roots. Why are they called roots? Because these mental factors, like roots that provide stability to a tree, they provide stability to all chitta chetasika dhamma. So the bottom line is sometimes learning about these dhammas, even though it is overwhelming, they might scare you, they might bring all sorts of doubts to you as to whether we can get out of this cycle. It might give rise to all of these thoughts, but that is a natural thing because it's very scary. The more we learn about it, the more scarier it gets. But the key thing here is to start learning to watch your mind, to observe your mind, how it behaves from moment to moment. So if I give you an example, when you think of wanting to watch a movie, observe what your mind is doing at that time. Your mind is craving for sights and sounds. And what does your mind do when you're thinking of some tasty food? It is craving for sight, smell, taste of that food. So, what do? You give it. You give the mind the satisfaction by doing whatever the mind tells you to do. This is what drives us. This is what drives us and makes us generate kamma. The mind develops some sort of craving and we fulfill that craving. So, one thing we can do is to observe our mind and deny it from what it is asking for. It's not easy, but that would be one way of training our mind. And this is also the basis for sila. We are restraining our sense faculties. And if you take the instance where we observe either 8 or 10 precepts during the full moon Poya days, this teaches us how to restrain our senses. So if you take the precept Nachagita Vadita Visuka Dasana Mala Gandha Vilepana Dharana Mandana Vibhusanattana Veramani Sikkhapadan Samadhyami. There we deliberately restrain ourselves from uh, singing, dancing, all kinds of entertainment. Then we refrain from wearing perfumes, beautiful clothes. We dress in a very simple manner when we go to the temple. So likewise, we are restraining our senses to a certain extent. So this is a way of teaching ourselves to restrain our senses. So that is sila. And why is it necessary to restrain our senses? Because sila is the foundation to samadhi, concentration, and panya, wisdom. And if you look at the barriers for samadhi and panya, they are the 5 nivarana, hindrances. That's the main barrier for samadhi. So, what are the 5 hindrances? They are uh, they are listed in the Samanya Palasutta in a beautiful way. So it is described as similes of water, different types of water. So one is kamachanda, sensual desire. How is it described? When water is mixed with various colors, you can't see your reflection clearly. What you will see is a reflection with a color. So you won't see the exact reflection, but it will be an altered reflection. That's what Kama Chanda is. Next we have Vyapada, ill will. Ill will is like boiling water. So when the water is boiling, it's very agitated, it's very disturbed. And the mind at the same time is like that when it has vyapada, ill will. It's not still, it's very agitated. So an agitated mind can never think straight. Then we have Tinamidda, sloth and torpor. Sloth and torpor. So this is the simile is given here as water covered with algae and moss. So when there are algae and moss floating on the water, you will not be able to see anything beyond. You won't be able to see the water properly. So the mind that is full of tina midda, sloth and torpor, is a very stagnant sort of mind, which is not a clear mind. You can't think clearly. And then we have vichikicha, doubt. Doubt is like muddy water. When the water is muddy, it's very clouded, very unclear. So that is the state of a doubtful mind. So the bottom line is when water is uncolored, when it's still clear, then one is able to see one's reflection clearly. Similarly, when the 5 hindrances are abolished or abandoned from the mind also becomes very clear, bright, and able to generate knowledge and insight. So, this is the importance of uh, eradicating the 5 hindrances. And if you look at these hindrances, kamachanda is another word for lobha. Then vyapada is another word for dosa. These are roots. Then again, another way of looking at these defilements are by looking at the anusaya dhamma, the latent tendencies. There are 7 anusaya dhamma. These are like dormant volcanoes. They are waiting to erupt. So whenever the opportunity presents itself, these volcanoes, these defilements that are sleeping will come to the surface. So sometimes you may think, I don't have that kind of defilement, but the minute an opportunity presents itself, these defilements spring up to the top. So what are these 7 defilements? Kamaraga, latent tendency to sensual lust. Patiga, aversion or ill will. Ditti, wrong views. Vichikicha, doubt. Mana, conceit. Bhavaraga, craving for existence. Avidya, ignorance. So here we have all 3 roots. Kamaraga and Bhavaraga corresponds to Lobha Chetasika or Lobha Mula. Patiga corresponds to dosa mula and avijja corresponds to moha mula. So once again, these three roots are also part of the seven Anusaya Dhamma. So you can see how important it is to understand them and how important it is to eradicate them. So our task is to train our minds. One way is through restraining, we can learn to control them, like kind of stop them from arising, at least to a certain extent. And through samatha meditation, we can learn to suppress them. And the example given in the Abhidhamma is, if you take a rubber ball and you push it, you put it into water and push it downwards, that downward force will prevent that ball from coming up on the surface and floating. So, samatha bhavana does a similar thing to these defilements. It suppresses the defilements and prevent them from coming up on the surface. But it's a very temporary thing. It is only through vipassana that we can completely eradicate these defilements. Next, when we look at the fetters, Lobha, dosa, moha once again are part of the fetters as well. And if you take moha, moha is among the five fetters that are eliminated last when one becomes an arahant. Right until that point, right until one becomes an arahant. That means even a sotapanna, sakadagami or anagami individual, they all will have avijja in different degrees. But it is only at the final stage, only when the Arahant Magga Chitta arises that Avijja is completely eradicated. So basically, Avijja is also the hardest route to completely eliminate. So the whole idea of learning the Dhamma is to understand this process of cause and effect and to start walking on the path. Question 2. This question is important to everyone who seeks to cultivate themselves and eliminate greed, hatred, and delusion. Why in our lives is hatred the most easily noticed in comparison? Next is greed, while delusion is the hardest to detect. In other words, in terms of difficulty of becoming aware of greed, hatred, and delusion, the order is delusion, greed, hatred. So, in order of the ease of becoming aware of these roots, first would be dosa or hatred. Next is lobha, greed, and moha. Delusion is the most difficult to become aware of. So, how can we understand this? Why does this happen in this way? So, we need to think of how we become aware of our thoughts. The main way of becoming aware is through our feelings or Vedana. So, if we look at the different feelings, Vedana, that are associated with each of these three roots, hatred is associated with domanassa, displeasure. And this can take various forms. It can either be as depression or sadness or low mood, anger, hatred. To various degrees, this displeasure can exist. So, out of the three types of mental feeling, this domanassa or displeasure is the most gross form of emotion. So, it is the most obvious. It is so obvious that it manifests in the body through facial expression. And even another person who is observing this individual can identify that this person is either angry or sad, so on. Then, if you think of the body itself, it causes the heart rate to go up. The speed of respiration goes up. Then the body temperature becomes warmer. So it creates a lot of bodily changes that becomes very obvious even to that individual itself. So this is why hatred is the most or the easiest route that one can identify. Then if you take lobha, Lobha is accompanied either by somanassa or upekka, that is pleasure or equanimity. These are not as gross as the domanassa. The least gross would be upekka. So somanassa also to a certain extent is gross, and the least gross vedana is upekka. Therefore, in general, the lobha will be less pronounced than dosa chitta. And finally, if you take moha, moha is always accompanied by upekka. So upekka or equanimity, it is a very subtle feeling. It is not easy to identify. And as we explained before, it is because we have so much moha in ourselves that we continue generating kamma and continue to go on this sansaric journey. So, because moha is so subtle, that is why we find it hard to eliminate it as well. We are deluded, and that is why we have been unable to get ourselves out of this chain of samsara. So, this subtlety is the reason for us to be least aware of it. So we have one more question, but unfortunately we don't have time to take that. So we will take that question during our next lesson. And now it is time to share merits.
老师说呢，我们还有一个问题，不过呢，因为现在没有时间了，我们就下一堂课的时候才为大家回答。那现在我们请大家呢一起来回向功德。
I would like all of you to join me. Akasatta cha bummatta devanaga mahiddika punyantang anumoditva chiran rakkantu sasanang chiran rakkantu desanang chiran rakkantu mamparang. Idam me jnatinang hotu sukita hontu jnatayo. Idam me jnatinang hotu sukita hontu jnatayo. Idam me jnatinang hotu sukita hontu jnatayo. Imina punya kammena mame bala samagamo satan samagamo hotu yavanibana pattiya. Idam me punyang asavakya vahang hotu. Idam me punyang nibbanassa paccayo hotu. Mama punya bhagam sabba sattanang bhajemi. Te sabbe me samang punya bhagam labantu. Buddha sasanang chirantittatu. Buddha sasanang chirantittatu. Buddha sasanang chirantittatu. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Anumodana, teacher.
The next class will be on the 5th of April.
我们的下一堂课呢将会在4月5号。
4月5号。4月5号。